Long before the pyramids rose above Egypt, long before Rome built its roads, long before the first pages of the Bible were written, there was a place where humanity crossed an invisible line. For thousands of years, people had hunted, farmed, prayed, traded, and built villages. But then, in the hot, flat lands between two great rivers, something different began to happen. People stopped living only as scattered communities. They built cities. They created governments. They invented writing. They measured time, recorded trade, organized labor, told epic stories, and built temples that reached toward the sky. And this raises one of the most fascinating questions in history. What was the oldest civilization in the world? The answer is not as simple as naming the oldest village, the oldest temple, or the oldest human settlement. Because civilization is more than people living together. It is a whole system. It is cities, laws, writing, organized religion, social classes, skilled work, trade, and shared identity. And when historians look for the earliest place where all of these things came together, they usually arrive in ancient Mesopotamia, in the land of Sumer. Today, this region is mostly in southern Iraq. But more than 5,000 years ago, it was a living world of canals, mud brick cities, temple towers, merchants, priests, farmers, kings, and scribes pressing signs into wet clay. Mesopotamia means between rivers. Those rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates. They flowed through dry land, but each year they brought water, mud, and life. Along their banks, people learned to control floods, dig irrigation canals, grow crops, and produce more food than they needed for survival. That surplus changed everything. When a village has just enough food, everyone must work to stay alive. But when a society has extra grain, some people can become builders. Others become traders. Others become priests, soldiers, potters, accountants, and rulers. A simple farming world begins to transform into something far more complex. This is how Sumer rose. By around the 4th millennium BCE, cities such as Uruk, Ur, and Eridu were growing in southern Mesopotamia. These were not cities like ours, with glass towers and traffic lights. They were made of sun-dried mud brick. Their streets were dusty. Their buildings were fragile. But their ideas were powerful enough to shape the future of civilization. Uruk is especially important. At its height, it became one of the first great urban centers in human history. Imagine standing there thousands of years ago, the heat rising from the earth, boats moving along canals, workers carrying baskets of clay, merchants bargaining, animals bleating, and above it all, a massive temple complex reminding everyone that the city belonged not only to humans, but to the gods. In Sumer, religion was not separate from daily life. The temple was also an economic center. It stored grain. It organized workers. It received offerings. It helped manage the city's wealth. And as these cities became more complex, human memory was no longer enough. Someone had to remember how much grain was collected. Who owned which animals? What goods were traded? Which workers had been paid? Which offerings belonged to which temple? So the Sumerians developed one of the most important inventions in history, writing. At first, it was not poetry. It was not literature. It was bookkeeping. Small marks on clay tablets helped people track goods, labor, and trade. Over time, those marks evolved into cuneiform, a writing system made by pressing a reed stylus into soft clay. The signs looked like tiny wedges. This may sound simple, but it changed the human story forever. Before writing, memory lived mainly in the mind and in oral tradition. After writing, memory could survive outside the body. A debt, a law, a prayer, a royal order, a myth, all could be preserved. The past could now speak. And eventually, those clay tablets carried something deeper than numbers. They carried stories, including the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest known works of literature. Gilgamesh was a legendary king of Uruk, and his story wrestled with friendship, power, grief, death, and the human longing for immortality. Think about that. More than 4,000 years ago, people were already asking the same questions we ask today. What makes a life meaningful? Can love survive death? Why must humans suffer? What do we leave behind? That is what makes Sumer feel so close, even across the enormous distance of time. But Sumer was not only about writing and myth. It was also a world of invention and organization. The people of Mesopotamia developed advanced irrigation systems. They used mathematics for measuring land and managing trade. They studied the sky. They divided time in ways that still echo in our lives today. Every time you look at a 60-minute hour or a 360-degree circle, you are touching a legacy that runs back through ancient Mesopotamian mathematics. The Sumerians also built Ziggurats, massive step temple platforms that rose above the flat landscape. One of the most famous is the Ziggurat of Uruk, connected with the moon god Nana. To modern eyes, it looks like a monument. But to the people who built it, it was a bridge between earth and heaven. Civilization, for them, was not just survival. It was order. It was meaning. It was the belief that humans could shape the world, but only within a universe ruled by divine forces. Of course, Sumer was not a single unified country in the modern sense. It was a land of city-states. Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Kish, Nippur, and others each had their own rulers, temples, and local power struggles. Sometimes they traded. Sometimes they fought. And this is another sign of civilization, not just beauty and invention, but competition, inequality, war, and control. The rise of cities brought opportunity, but also pressure. Farmers had to maintain canals. Workers had to serve institutions. Rulers needed authority. Records needed accuracy. Land and water became sources of wealth, and wealth became something to defend. This is where the story becomes more human, and more complicated. The oldest civilization in the world was not a peaceful paradise. It was a brilliant experiment, built by people trying to solve practical problems: how to feed a city, how to organize labor, how to store grain, how to please the gods, how to survive floods, droughts, and rivals. And yet, from those problems came history. Later, the Akkadians rose under Sargon of Akkad, often described as one of the earliest empire builders in recorded history. Sumerian culture did not simply vanish. Its writing, religion, literature, and administrative ideas influenced later Mesopotamian civilizations, including Babylon and Assyria. In other words, Sumer became a foundation. But was it truly the oldest civilization? That depends on what we mean. There are older human sites. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey is far older than Sumer and shows that hunter-gatherers could build extraordinary ritual monuments. Jericho is one of the world's oldest continuously inhabited settlements. Çatalhöyük was a remarkable Neolithic town. Ancient Egypt, the Indus Valley, China, and Caral-Supe in Peru were also among the great early cradles of civilization. But if we are talking about the earliest known civilization with cities, writing, complex administration, monumental architecture, and organized urban life, Sumer remains one of the strongest answers. That is why so many documentaries use titles like Mesopotamia, the first civilization in history, because the phrase captures something real. Not that nothing important came before it, but that in Mesopotamia, humanity created a new kind of world. A world where clay became a database. Where rivers became engines of society. Where temples became institutions. Where stories became literature. Where cities became the stage for power, belief, conflict, and imagination. The most moving part is this: the Sumerians did not know they were the first civilization. They were not trying to become a chapter in a textbook. They were trying to live, to grow food, to honor their gods, to protect their homes, to make sense of the sky, the river, birth, death, and time. And somehow, while doing that, they built the foundations of history. Today, the ruins of Sumer are quiet. The cities that once rang with voices are mostly broken walls, buried tablets, and wind-blown earth. The rivers still flow, but the world they nourished has changed beyond recognition. Yet Sumer is not really gone. It survives every time we write something down because memory matters. It survives every time a city organizes itself around laws, labor, trade, and belief. It survives every time we ask ancient questions with modern voices. Who are we? Where did we begin? And what will remain of us when our own cities are dust? The oldest civilization in the world is not just a story about the past. It is a mirror. It reminds us that everything we call modern, writing, cities, timekeeping, government, literature, and organized society, began with ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges beside two rivers. And from clay, water, grain, and imagination, they built the first great doorway into history. If this journey made you see the ancient world a little differently, give the video a like, and subscribe for more deep stories from human history. This is VeyrScope.